is that, I don't, it doesn't really, I guess I have no context at all whatsoever, except at a very macro level, right? From an India to you, this is so US centric, so America centric. So I have a sense of it because I've worked overseas, etc. But if I had not been to America, I mean, it would have been completely lost on me, the scale of stuff and how they were doing it. But at a philosophical level, it's pretty clear as to what's going on. I think in India, it will be quite fascinating to see how, a lot of this might already be going on and it's not been documented.
It could be, yeah. I mean, even the Europeans have developed KFOS now in Holland, Germany. I mean, but more with pigs and poultry, not with cattle, because they don't have the range, the space for cattle. Hi, Eric.
Hi. I got confused. I got stuck over in YouTube and I couldn't figure out what the heck was going on.
They are putting in this Microsoft thing, and I don't know how to take it out. So a lot of people are clicking on Microsoft instead of the Zoom link.
Huh.
I don't know.
You mean the Google Meet link?
Right. Yeah. So people click on that and they get confused, but it automatically comes in there, which is the reason why Zoom stock keeps going into free fall here. Yeah, I didn't get out fast enough. But did any? Yeah. So this animal. Eric, do you want to introduce yourself briefly, because it's your first time in the team here?
Sure. Yeah, my name is Eric Jackson. I wear several hats, none of them full time. I'm technically retired. Don't tell my wife, but I am technically retired. I'm the board chair of the Bionutrient Food Association, and one of our current projects is doing research into the nutrient density of beef as it relates to ecosystem outcomes and across different farming systems. So we're trying to figure out the cause and effect of farming, not only on the ecology but also on the quality of food. And they've been doing research in this field for a number of years. But beef is our current love affair, because we have a doctor of metabolomics who wants to extend his human research back to the farm, his human response research back to the farm. I think other things that might be relevant to this group, I'm also an advisor to a group called Other Half Processing, and we are trying to make markets for the other half, if you will, of animals that are raised in a special manner. So, there's organic, there's regenerative organic, there's grass-fed, there's a whole number of different labels that people use. But part of the challenge for those producers is that they can usually sell their prime product, think steak or chicken breast or whatever, but the balance of the animal usually goes back into what we call the commodity bin. So they don't get any type of premium value. They may not even get a full commodity value for that. So it makes it very difficult for them to do forward planning and count on reasonable economics in those systems. So we're making markets for things like hides and bones, the 15 to 20% of the meat that's not the prime cut. So that's what we do at the other half, at Other Half Processing. And then I sit on a number of other advisory boards. Probably the only other one that's relevant for this group is something called Home Plate Foods. We're trying to develop markets in the healthcare industry, starting with the community-based nutrition programs for regenerative products. Again, on the theme of nutrient density, on the theme of every bite counts, because these are vulnerable populations that receive these foods. But heretofore, it's been very much a commoditized program. They really haven't spent much time working on food quality. So think Meals on Wheels is sort of a proxy for this whole industry. There's about 9,000 organizations around the country that fall into this bucket. They spend about $9 billion a year on food, and about 40% of that is animal protein. So starting with the animal protein side of it, we're trying to upgrade what goes into those food systems, because again, the people who are the recipients are typically more vulnerable populations who have all types of metabolomic challenges and other health and wellness problems, and food is certainly core to their health. So all these things are kind of pointed in the same direction. You might get I have a theme going here. Klaus, I don't know, anything else that you think might be relevant?
Well, we did a webinar together, and that was on looking at putting food, regenerative food into the community, and it was an interesting conversation.
Right.
And now Eric pointed out the nutritional quality of food is related to the health of the microbiome in the soil. So this linkage between soil microbiome and gut microbiome is what they're working on, and to bring awareness of that to the public is one of the challenges, and actually, in my mind, a key lever, because now, as you explained, particularly to mothers, how important it is to have the right micronutrients in your food for the healthy development of your child, particularly the brain, is an extremely important part, because the American food is so deprived of micronutrients because of the way we farm. Yeah. So it's a really important body of work, and I really hope we can do something to promote this more and bring it more into the public's mind. Yeah, it's a key lever.
Thank you.
Yeah. Pamji, do you want to just introduce yourself quickly?
Hi, yeah, I guess I'm best described as a generalist. Having said that, I've had decades of experience in health inequalities, and so that led me into areas such as economics, because it kind of really touches on everything, health inequalities. It's not one thing. Recently, I've got very interested in natural health, and I'm doing an Ayurveda course. And also, I've been doing a lot of research around natural law. And so what's becoming increasingly clear for me is that there are certain principles that kind of overlap, that provide the core of what is good for us. And then everything else that complicates that core of, what's kind of good and nutritious and just and fair, they usually tend to be man-made kind of spokes in the wheels. And it's just like a question of trying to remove as many of those as we can and get back to the core of the hearty, healthy stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. Sarah, you're also new to the group.
Yes. Hi, everyone. I was late arrival last week, but glad to be here. I've been working with Klaus through Business Climate Leaders, where I've been volunteering for, it's 5 years now, working on projects like webinars dedicated to the ag industry and the chemical industry with Klaus and Joel Stone, who leads the chem sector. We've had a great series of webinars in the past 2 years that have really been focused on food systems and the impact of poor farming practices on things like nutrition, just mentioned, and general soil health, and the need to try to get food systems lined up into new market areas. And some of it is restorative in terms of not just making sure that our soil is back to par so that it produces what it needs to in order to feed the world, but it's also distributed in a proper way that makes sure that local food systems are sustained and that there are markets through which growers and ranchers can actually make sure that their products are appropriately vetted. And it's a work in progress, and we've had some really extraordinary response. Really thoughtful people from across industries that are involved in ag and chem and in climate So it's been very heartening, and we're hoping that we can continue those discussions.
Yeah, thanks.
Glad to see everyone.
So I wanted the reason why I recommended watching this Right to Harm movie is because I was looking for the emotional impact this had on you. Stacy, you are good at this. Would you describe the emotional response when you watch something like this?
So I can't believe you're going to call on me because I feel like the student that didn't do her homework, and I thought it was a different movie and I didn't watch it. However, I will ask a different question that speaks to the emotional impact in a different way. And I don't mean to sound too woo-woo, but when Eric Jackson was talking, the first question that came to my mind was if there's any research on how the amount of stress that's put on an animal affects the nutritional value, because that's where it hit my emotions. And that's a way that I think could reach a lot of people. So I don't know if that speaks to where you wanted to go at all,
Yeah, totally.
but that's what comes up for me.
Yeah, and that's a little bit outside of the scope of the research that we're doing right now, but that is a fairly well-researched area. Particularly, I'm trying to remember the woman's name who designed Temple Grandin. Thank you very much, Eric. That's
Thank you.
correct. Yeah, Temple Grandin spent a fair amount of time, particularly at end of life stress, around transportation and handling just prior to slaughter. But also, I think, back in the feed yard and under different, I'll call them growing conditions. So Temple Grandin would be where I would suggest you would do some initial. I mean, farming systems, if you think about it, if you go from birth to death with an animal, the corollary on pasture relative to feedlot, right, with regards to stress, how we stitch all that together, TBD, but there's definitely a difference that we've seen, at least in the early part of our research, between pastured animals and feedlot animals in terms of the quality of the meat, and particularly things like secondary metabolites, which can be indicators of all kinds of things, stress included. So it's a really good question. I mean, I'm make a note of that and kind of make sure that we thread that into some of the questions that we're asking the growers, because this is a combination of data that we collect directly, samples that we collect directly, and farmers offering sort of stories about their operation. So we've got a rich body of information, but of course, if you're not looking for something, you won't find it, right? So I appreciate that, that reminder.
I mean, you would think that the adrenaline, that the constant panic that these animals are in, gets into the meat, right? I mean, when you think about your own physical response to stress, now how it impacts your entire muscle structure. Now, of course, it's so that Stacy, that is good one. Eric, what is your emotion when you think about meat and the way these animals are treated?
Me?
No, I'm sorry, Eric Rangel. Eric.
Okay.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, I know that Temple Grandin did a movie about that, but also when watching that movie about the farm, there was a comment about the quality of the meat produced on that farm. So it was more grass-fed or free range, and but the question is, do they get better prices for that, and are consumers responding to that? Because I mean, the impression I got from the movie is it really teaches me, like, my life is unsustainable as is right now, the way I'm using resources. And so how do you get people to that realization, that make it personal, and then where do I go from there?
Okay, so we wanted to talk about archetypes. Do I pronounce this correctly? And archetype.
Archetypes. I
And,
think you mean archetypes?
Yeah, what is it?
Archetype. Archetypes?
Archetypes. All right, here we go. You have a bunch of foreigners here on
Just call them frequently recurring structures. Nobody
yeah.
understands archetypes anyway.
Yeah, so I wanted to get into what do we understand under archetypes, but before I get into that, I've been tracking the World Economic Forum discussions around food, which have been horrendously distorted, right? Because about 4 or 5 years ago, the World Economic Forum came out with the future of food and had a McKinsey study, which basically ended up in Impossible Meats and the lab grown protein products extracted from plants, and it was just a mess. But what I'm seeing now, and I'm just putting this in here, if you're interested in watching this is a fantastic conversation in the World Economic Forum, where they are all of a sudden waking up to the reality of how the environment is degrading because of the way we farm and the input from farms. So this definitely is bound to have an impact on the industry and on the political process, because the World Economic Forum is probably a more powerful organization than the United Nations is, in the way that they're impacting everything around us. But yeah, so let's define what is an archetype. Gene, you started with a good example there.
It's a well-defined structure with a characteristic pattern of behavior that actually has very well-defined strategies for how to deal with it. Okay. And
now transfer that to people. And with my marketing background, I would say it's a segmentation strategy, right? I mean, it's segmenting people into groups. Is that fair?
I'm not sure what you want to segment them for or to. In other words, I'm not connecting with the comment.
Right.
Not that it's wrong. It's just I don't know what you mean.
Right. So typically the mantra is that segmentation is the best predictor of behavior and response to stimuli. So when you segment people into groups that are like-minded and that are typically defined as archetypes, you can start predicting how they would respond to information, and you have the characteristics of archetypes in the way that they process language, the language they're using, vocabulary, mind pictures. And so in the context of climate change, and in particular here, food systems, how would we categorize, hopefully, I mean, sorry if I offend anybody here, but how would you categorize or segment people into buckets that require communication styles and ways to articulate, ways to make references, mind pictures, you know?
The early adopters, the leading people, the middle of the rows, the late adopters, and the people who will never change. All right, that's Crossing the Chasm by Jeffrey Moore. All right, you can say it's a typical segmentation for anything new. You have those people who are early adopters, and they're constantly living on the ledge all the time because they're adopting all of the new stuff as soon as it comes along. And then there's the late adopters who are not going to jump until they see like 12% of the people actually engaged, because they want to be sure that it makes sense. And then there's the middle of the road that's, you know, the top of the bell curve. And then you got all the people over on the right-hand side of it that are the late adopters, are the ones that just don't try to change them because you're not going to. Just wait for them to die.
So that's one well accepted structure, but can we break that down one level lower and say, how would this apply to, let's say, someone living in a city versus someone living on the in the countryside, someone who is in a blue collar job versus a professional sitting in an office? So how do different population segments react to change? I mean, are they, so this early adopter and so on, how does that apply one step lower in the segmentation, in the segmentation hierarchy, respond then? Does that make sense?
I think I understand what you're asking, and I have not seen anything in my travels that does a comparison of the segmentation that you talked about to the one that I talked about. Not that it's probably appropriate, but I don't know.
Yeah, so the challenge we have, and I mean, I think everyone in the group here has been talking with someone or with friends, or trying to convince someone about the need to respond to climate change and to adapt in various ways, whether that's the energy sector or the food sector. But we tend to have like one approach, because we are, you know, who we are communicating in one style. But if we are now looking to adapt our style to the audience we're talking with, right? So what kind of adaptations are required to come across to different types of people, right? So, I mean, one example is that we basically stopped talking about climate change when it comes to food, and instead we talk about water, right? Because water is a problem everywhere you go, whether you're in Florida or in India or in California. People have an issue with water, too much of it, not enough of it, polluted, poisoned, and so on. So that's one way to, but it's still quite general. So if we can sort of develop some segmentation, then we can develop communication tools to communicate with different types of groups. So that's sort of where I was heading with this.
I thought last week, Jean, it might have been you who mentioned the helping people understand what goes into the price of a can of peas. And I think, you know, I'm thinking back to when I was a child in the 70s, there was a lot more knowledge about what went into food and how pricing happened, and the concepts of commercialism and all of those things. And that's kind of overshadowed a lot of the organic food market, I think, through entities like Whole Foods. And, you know, good food is an elite thing, through the commoditization of what makes good food. And, you know, the challenge is, of course, making good food plentiful and regular in available markets, and having people understand what goes into it in a practical fashion that's beyond, you know, oh, I got this fancy food because I can afford it and I care about myself, I think would lend to some practical understanding across the board, especially just in all of the attention and focus on what farmers need to do in order to make a great product and where their product goes from there. So there hasn't been a real lot of attention paid or described or description about what happens in the middle, between farm to table. And I think, you know, some breakdown or analysis of commodity training and who are the people involved in that would be helpful to the consumer prospect, and also folks who are involved in the supply chain, because I don't think people in the supply chain are often aware of the other folks along the supply chain route.
I mean, I think
It wasn't me, Sarah, though. if you want something to deter you from eating processed foods, go watch videos about how it's processed.
Yeah.
It will horrify you. I mean, it's
Well,
not just animals,
recently.
but everything. It's just
Well, it's how do we get that communication to a wider audience? What, people who are in certain segmentation silos, how do we break down a compelling and positive message? Because a lot of times people don't want to hear the ugly truth. So somehow presenting things that are not too gruesome, that are palpable to the audience because they can't take it. They don't have, dare I say, the stomach to tolerate the truth. But really presenting them with the most pertinent facts about, even if it boils down to quality and pricing issues, for those people who are on the edge, who need to be pulled in to the process.
Yeah, I guess there are two ways to approach this. One is to horrify people about glyphosate and animal husbandry and things like that. And the other thing would be to create a positive message, right? That's constructive and that makes people look for like-minded or for products that fit into this search for positive things.
I mean, it's been very apparent to us at the Bionutrient Food Association that there's really nobody else doing the kind of research that we're doing, certainly not at the scale at which we're doing it. And we think that I mean, it's as long as you stick to basic scientific method and you don't let your thesis get in the way of the results, we believe that anybody will be able to replicate our results. And because we're doing this agricultural research in conjunction with the medical community, and we will be able to do end-to-end analysis on patient outcome or client outcome relative to the source of the food and have measurements along the way. We think it's all a good story, right? We don't have to talk about, we have to figure out how to give folks a green, yellow, red type indication system so that it's brutally simple. But if the data continues to show what we've seen in the early days here, there's a very, very positive, compelling story that can be built upon. And we're doing everything in the commons. We're a not-for-profit. We hope other people take what we have started and run with it. Ultimately, we'd like to see markets built around this information, because that's how you make things work in this world, unfortunately. But that is, I think it comes down to research, and I think it's startling, a little bit startling, although it probably doesn't surprise this group. If you take a look at the literature, how big the gaps are, how consistent the research has been done in support of the incumbent system, and how big the gaps are around other systems that are emerging, and the lack of research on those systems, and therefore the lack of data that can be supportive of, customer choice or farmer choice or any choice that anybody would make. So, the gutting of the public research institutions has forced the research institutions to basically do the research that the private sector wants them to do. And that leaves us with an enormous gap in knowledge.
That's actually a great lead to where I was hoping to go, because Eric was in our webinar, I think it was last year, August, September. So we were holding this, and I became aware through the discussions that we had of this link between the soil microbiome and the gut microbiome. And to restore the soil microbiome is foundational to recover soil, to sequester carbon into soil, to repair watersheds and so on, right? Because for the carbon basically feeds the soil microbiome, right? And the soil microbiome is the foundation of life on land, because you're starting with basic microorganisms which then feed higher forms of life. the microorganisms feed worms, which feed birds and small mammals, and it goes up the food chain. The microorganisms are also supporting plants and plant life. So if the microbiota in the soil is dead, then you have to use synthetic fertilizers and phosphates and in-mind inputs to replicate the nutrition that the plants need to grow. And then, of course, that these inputs are maybe 12 or 14 or so items, whereas a healthy soil may have 100. So the many of the minerals and metals and so on that are in the soil, micronute pieces of that, are very important for the development of the brain and so on and so on. So this linkage, right, of making people understand that the soil is alive and it's expressed in the microbiota, and carbon is food for the microbiota, right? If that link can be made made to be understood by the general public, then you basically have achieved, a demand pattern looking for healthy food coming from healthy soil, which then will stimulate the entire regeneration process. So that's one form of this kind of segmentation that I'm thinking about.
I mean, Gene's point about the adoption, where he was describing, I think it's called the technology adoption curve, and innovators and early adopters and early majority and late majority and laggards. Those are the breakdowns, and that has some applicability to what you're talking about, Klaus, but it does not. I'm a bit of a student of that. I'm certainly no expert, but it does not address true demographics. It really is it's an observation of who shows up first, right? We call those innovators, and those in the early adopters are critical to getting 17% of a population involved in adoption of a new technology. And then you have to cross the chasm, hence the name of the book. And that chasm is where most technology dies, because you can't get across that chasm. You can't get to the early majority, which is critical to commercial success for any new idea. So it has applicability to this discussion, but it doesn't talk about, there's no basic breakdown by age group or location or, cultural background, or, that's a fantastically complicated question that you're asking, Klaus, and I don't know where those breakouts are done for purposes other than perhaps, in your marketing background. That would probably be the most instructive, because you're selling ideas there, right? And this is really a behavioral observation. Some people will just buy the newest thing almost all the time, irregardless. They are the innovators, right? Whether it works or not, they want to have the coolest. They want to have the coolest, newest stuff, and the early adopters are kind of right behind them once something hits the marketplace. But it doesn't really get to, I think, the gut of what you're trying to peel apart here.
Well, Stacy, let me have Stacy has her hand up.
Yeah, I've been trying to think about, your question, and just in the only adjectives that come to mind that really create their own sector, and I don't know how big this sector is, but there's this naturally suspicious and cynical group. And there's a different way to speak to them. And they do receive the information differently. And that's usually how I'm able to speak to people that I have totally different political views with, by appealing to that, like knowing where they're coming from and speaking to them, like joining the quest with them, so to speak. I don't know if I'm articulating this properly, but that's the sector where every message would be tailored. So for me, the links that I think of, like when you're talking about the soil, I always look at like these high-paid doctors who are pushing these nutritional supplements. And I think about the billions of dollars in that industry when instead we could just be fixing the soil. And so I'll bring that into the conversation because they're looking for a conspiracy anyway. I'm just shifting who their target is. So I just wanted to share that.
That's yeah.
And the other thing that I want to add is one of the main places where I do connect with people who are usually really loud and on a totally different political place than I am is in our love of animals. That's why I brought up the emotional part before.
Yeah, that's interesting. The conspirator, which we have now plenty of. That's an interesting angle. Jane.
The crossing the chasm curve is not just for technology. It typically relates to any group with a similar set of emotional connections. So in terms of if you're looking for a message, well, it's a different kind of message for farmers. It's a different kind of message for the doctors pushing pills, supplements. And when you were talking about different groups of people, within that group, you need to find groups that have similar values and beliefs that you can connect with emotionally. I've lost track of how many papers I've read that say facts don't change people's minds. You have to figure out how to connect with them emotionally. Right? I mean, how long have we known that cigarettes are highly likely to lead to an early death? And how many people haven't yet quit smoking? Right? Those are the people way over there that, my grandfather smoked for 70 years and he died of old age. So what am I worried about? I mean, they have logical arguments for everything. And you have to figure out how to connect with the ones that you can connect with and let the rest of them die. Right? Yeah. Be realistic. All right.
I don't know.
The ones that you can't, in other words, don't beat your head against the wall trying to convert people that are never going to convert. They will go away eventually.
Yeah, but I'm convinced that there are enough people who follow reason, particularly when you talk about mothers, right? But they just don't get to the information that that really would influence behavior. So Neil, you're putting some notes into the chat here. Would you care to explain?
Well, I've just tried some provocations to myself, just trying to get the context of this and raising it to a different, more abstract level. Because, if we discuss segmentation, we might actually get stuck in trying to do stuff where we get to do all the heavy lifting instead of handing it over to the market, so to speak. So the provocations I've put into the chat are, I think, number one, Eric Rangel said that social media has got a lot of polarization. So is there a way that we can leverage that to spread the word, the good word, right? I mean, if there is polarization, then there are at least two views which are diametrically opposite. And who are we to judge which is the right view and wrong view? Let the market decide, let people decide. But as long as you can create some sort of a conversation, the buzz gets created and then people get interested and who knows where that will go. So that was my first provocation. The second one was, can we think of a non-segmentation strategy? And the reason that came to me was that, if you look at the most successful movies across time, I don't think and since we're talking stories, the reason that I'm bringing this up is because we are talking storytelling. Basically, communication is a form of storytelling. So the stories that have the maximum appeal, and I'll go to also what Jean said speaks to me, that it's an emotional connect. So can we think of universal stories, that will connect with everybody? Why segment at all? So these were my two provocations. I'm sorry, I have this habit of putting spanners into the works, but that's, I guess, the way that you foster creativity.
Yeah.
Sunil, I was not laughing at you. I was laughing at Eric's post. Okay.
No, I'm quite okay if you
It was-
laugh at me.
but-
I'm a funny guy
No,
anyway. Gene.
no, I thought it was hilarious, though absolutely true. So,
I have to read it. So here, Brandolini's law, also known as the bullshit asymmetric principle, is an internet adage that emphasizes the difficulty of debunking false, facetious, or otherwise misleading information. The amount of energy needed to refute bullshit is an order of magnitude larger than to produce it. Right? You have that experience when you're getting into a discussion on LinkedIn or social media. So this guy puts out some nonsense, and then you do research to debunk it, and then he puts out the next piece of nonsense, and you spend all your time debunking it. Yeah. So but when I look at a small group of people discussing things here, what we need to get to in social media are the influencers, right? Because they are particularly. I noticed yesterday there was a 19-year-old girl on TikTok, and she has something like 120 million followers. I mean, it's so.
Yeah, but that's actually now, people are seeing through that, because influencers are only making money for themselves by telling the brand that I've got more followers now, where it doesn't really make a difference in the market any longer. Because I mean, people see through it. People are, I guess, customers and consumers, people like us, we are actually much smarter than we look. So and the marketing people kind of try to push stuff down. So something that works for, let's say, Pepsi, somebody will want to do it, to say that, hey, this is work for Pepsi, let's do it. So I think it's a model that's worked in the past, but the thing is that we now need to come up with a new model for the new parameters that we see around ourselves. So I mean, this is not a solution, but because this is a provocation, and I'm wondering that, okay, so if we want to do something with the minimum of effort that we need to put in, but we want the maximum impact, what could those strategies actually be? So Klaus, taking a cue from your point on TikTok, right? How about just writing a two-line contest and put it out there on TikTok and say, hey guys, you know what? The best stories are going to get, let's say, what, $2,000 or something like that, right? And so then you let people talk about it, and then the ones that are smart. So we don't know whether humor is going to work with the consumer. We don't know whether talking down to them is going to work with the consumer. We don't know if fear is going to work well with them or not. And so we've got to then keep on, finding out and doing analysis and research, by which time, the horse is already bolted. So my sense is that if you just let people have fun, and the best stories will bubble up to the surface. And we may not need to make that much of an effort, except to actually come in there, quietly and put in our little comments, which increase the quality of the information more than trying to do the communication from our side.
Yeah, what I was trying to get to is what is this kind of information that you want to insert there, and how do you structure it so that it resonates with the type of person that you're addressing, right? So I mean, it's one thing to say, let's just put something in there, but what is it that you want to put in there? So the idea for this archetype conversation, moving into segmentations and so on, is how do you shape messages that are audience appropriate or specifically addressing, for example, a TikTok influencer, and they have amazing influence. I mean, it's just all in ways that, and you're looking at a generation we have very little in common with here. I mean, you're looking at teenagers and
yeah, that's my point. Yes,
and so but they are quite quite influenceable. I mean, they are very emotionally connected to their figures, but we haven't been able to reach these influences, for whatever reason. Obviously, the messages that we have are not resonating, where you would think that young people should be the most concerned, and they are. I mean, when you look at this, what I call the Greta Thunberg generation, they are very animated and engaged and what have you, but they have no idea how to actually act, right? So I call it. So we are, I think, in a phase right now where we need to operationalize, and this link that I pointed towards the World Economic Forum discussion there, they are talking about the need to operationalize ground level up, right? And that's where the gap is currently. And so that means engaging the population in ways that has them participate in this change process. So everyone understands we need to figure this out, but we haven't been able to really shape these messages in ways that they penetrate.
Well, I
question
think part
to-
of it.
to-
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Sarah.
I was just thinking about what it is that speaks to youth, and they've gotten, they get avalanches of information. It's the inertia they feel from being overwhelmed with so much information and harsh reality, and the paralysis that ensues with that they're not able to take it from their phones into action, from from AI, artificial virtual world into reality. And I think that's the gap, as the first fully inundated with virtual everything generation, that has to be bridged. And it's hard, it's very difficult. I mean, look at the struggles we have with people just putting down their phones, or being able to figure out where they belong in larger contexts right now. I mean, we can tell people till we're blue in the face, don't drive, take a bike, but if you need to get to your job in a car, what are you going to do? And I think having those pathways from virtual and theoretical into reality is what we're dealing with right now, especially with the younger generation. And so giving them something palpable, actionable, I think is really important. And what that is remains at large. I think they know what to do, and they can be supportive of certain things, but how will those spiritual supports translate into something that's changeable or changing the circumstances?
Yeah. Palmjet, you have your hands up.
Oh, thank you, Klaus. I'm a little bit, I feel a little bit lost with this discussion, because on the one hand, you're talking about the need to generate better soil and ecosystems. And then you're talking about the need for youngsters to be open to certain messages, which messages are, I guess, around eating healthy food. Is that right?
So, I mean, I've been bouncing on this for years, right? What it comes down to is the need to recover soil and watersheds. And so to enrich soil with carbon, to restart the cycle of life inside the soil, which then automatically, for every 1% of carbon you're adding into the soil, it can hold an additional 20,000 gallons of water per acre, and it increases the absorption rate of water into the soil. So it's an incredibly important part of the natural system, of the ecosystem. So how do you stimulate how do you stimulate a transition where farmers begin to regenerate their soil? Because that requires an adaptation, the types of crops you're growing, using cover crops, rotating crops, using no-till application, reducing your chemical inputs, and so on and so on. So then translating that into ways that would motivate people to look for these changes in ways that's meaningful to them. So, for example, when you explain that 90% of the American population has glyphosate, traces of glyphosate in their urine, and that a majority of American mothers have glyphosate in their breast milk, right? That is like, wow. But without glyphosate, the farmers can't farm the way they farm, right? So if you attack glyphosate, for example, and insist on the reduction of glyphosate, particularly as it penetrates into the food supply, then that in and by itself forces a change in the way we farm. And so if you explain the linkage between the food quality coming out of a healthy soil microbiome to how it impacts your gut microbiome, that awareness makes the consumer look for different types of products, pushing the market into a different direction. So these are leverage points, right?
So you want young people to buy healthier food that doesn't have glyphosate in, is that right?
Well, that's one thing. I mean, to avoid glyphosate, and there is a label coming that's glyphosate free, certified glyphosate free. That in and by itself would dramatically change, the way farmers have to handle their
right. So your model of change is to influence the consumers.
That's where the hang-up is right now, because farmers, by and large, understand that they're losing their soil. There is problems with water. They understand that we need to change our practices, but the supply chain won't let them, because the way that the industrial supply chain is configured, it's a vertically integrated machine, that needs commoditized, industrialized standard inputs, so that you can have 30,000 restaurants all serving the same food, the same French fry, the same burger, and so on, right? The same buns. And so if the farmer changes into these regenerative practices, that implies a decentralization of the entire supply chain, because different regions in the country will have to use different types of crops to regenerate their soil. I mean, even if they grow corn, it will be maybe a different species of corn, a different type of seed, and so on.
So you want to make that change happen with decentralizing food production through young people realizing they have to have healthier food.
To realize that they need to localize food in order to repair local watersheds and local soil. Yeah. So that the linkage between the food we eat, and where we buy it from, empowers the farmer to make changes that we need them to make. So this is why we're transitioning right now to work in communities at community level, and to find ways to penetrate the communication within a community, so this adaptation becomes understood.
I think that's quite a complicated chain of change making.
Indeed.
Yeah. And the thing is, there's a right way to do something and a wrong way to do something. And what we want to do is to get the system seeing itself and identify the levers, which are going to be economic levers, business systems, transport systems, how we produce food and process it. They're all the lever points we need to look at. it's kind of very vague to me that you're thinking of putting all your energy into changing what young people want to eat. It's all very fuzzy to link that back to what farmers are doing, because farmers are going to do that. You know, they've done their best to hide the whole glyphosate thing. I don't mean farmers have done their best, but the system as it stands has done its best for us not to know that actually the stuff that's bad for us, you know, is not sugar, it's not fat, it's not all the things that we keep being told that it is. It's basically things that are artificially added, things that are processed, things that have been artificially, like oils are really good for you. It's only the oils that are mechanically recovered that are really bad. So the message is super simple. And I think everybody would understand it, from teenager to an old person. The thing is to change the systems, the way that the business is carried out and transported, and the trade, the economic landscape, the trade laws that are keeping that chain from being operationalized.
Yeah, we have to. I mean, it's not. I totally missed the time here at night, maybe hitting 9 o'clock, and I know some of you have to leave. But before we can go on a little longer with, if you can stay. I posted the link to a speech by now King Charles at Georgetown University, which he gave about 10, 11 years ago, which was
Yes, I've seen
phenomenal
Phenomenal,
speech.
yes.
So I would suggest to watch that and see how that resonates, because he really summarizes what a mess we're in. And that was so predictable 10 years ago, and it's just now coming to a head. You need to go, Sunil? Okay, Gene.
I think we keep missing the sequence is know what, know why, care why, know how. Okay, and we keep missing the care why. Okay, in other words, there's real good understanding of what and why, but they don't give a shit. Okay, because they don't connect. So you can beat them up all you want, and then they just don't connect. You have to understand what it is that they care about, and figure out how to connect them at that point. All right. All of the logic is worthless if they don't care. Now, the only people that I've ever met that don't care are dead people. So the question is to figure out what it is that they do care about.
Right.
And connect with them at that point. So you have to take what you know and why you realize that it's important, and figure out how to craft it in a way that connects with what they care about. Which means you have to really get to know the target audience. And we ain't them. Right?
Yeah, that was sort of the intention of focusing on archetypes and seeing if we can create some differentiations that make sense, and because once we have identified the type of person we are wanting to address, then we can shape a message by going into the world into the socioeconomic world of that audience, and think of what that may be. I mean, so for example, one example is, you're talking to mothers and tell them that it's very likely that you have glyphosate in your breast milk, and it has profound impacts on the mental development of your child.
No, I can't go tell them anything, okay? Because as soon as I tell them, I make them defensive and I push them away. I have to go and figure out how to get them to help me understand what they care about. I don't know what you care about. I could probably find out if we talked for a while. And I ask you to help me understand a bunch of things. I could figure out where your buttons were that could be pushed to actually get you to engage on certain topics. But I mean, I see this happen all the time. Very intelligent people figure out what, and they figure out why, and then they go sell the message to people that aren't going to listen to them.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the challenge. And from a marketing perspective, and I mean, I have a marketing background. This is confounding because it's not only that you have to shape messages, it's also that there is actually pushback, right, from within the industry. Like in the hearing, at the House hearing on agriculture this week, there was a representative from the sugar industry who was basically saying there's no linkage between the nutrient quality of food coming out of soil and cotton, and so it basically completely contradicting what Eric is saying. And then, so who's right? I mean, then
well, and the people that he's talking to are not smart enough to realize that he's being paid to say that, and because the sugar industry is giving them all money, they agree with him anyway. I mean, it just, it's all corrupt.
Yeah. Akela.
All of the money. Absolutely, Eric.
Yeah.
All of the money.
So we have Akela Biotech. We haven't seen you, and let us hear from you about the comment you just made here.
Hi, yeah. So my name is Stacy Rule, and I'm with Acela Biotech. And so we make a microbial consortium that is like a probiotic to restore soil health. So basically that liquid carbon that you were talking about is what our product is. And I've been spending some time in the United States since COVID has kind of opened up, meeting with farmers and talking to farmers and consumers. And I've had some success in terms of community, because especially in the rural agricultural areas, a big issue that farmers are facing is not just all of the challenges of farming, but also, especially here in the United States, the complete and total destruction of their local community. It's kind of interesting to see how effective the agenda of divide and conquer in terms of destroying communities in the United States has been, in the fact that even in a small rural community where people really do depend on each other, a lot of them now don't know each other or talk to each other or deal with each other, which I think is kind of interesting. And so I think, focusing on relocalization, preaching, doing some evangelism to people who are already on board and trying to build momentum that way, instead of trying to, fight the machine of marketing and media with the machine of marketing and media. I think if we can take another sidestep approach and focus on community, support for not just, transition to these more regenerative and more profitable systems long term, but also tying the consumer with the producer, more direct to consumer distribution on a smaller, more local level. So finding ways to, do a virtual farmers market when people can't, or more community sponsored agriculture where people are doing boxes that they can pick up at more convenient locations. Because here in the United States, there's a big problem where in a lot of the agricultural areas, the people who live there have no access to fresh food because most of the produce that is grown there, whether it's food staple crops or it's vegetables, are being exported to another region, state, country, or whatever. So starting with relocalization seems to have gained a little bit of traction and some interest as I have been talking to people about these types of things.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a slow process, to penetrate and spread. Gene, are we having enough data points to work on a model, on a communications model?
Sure we do. From the time, from the time that it was proven beyond the shadow of a doubt that citrus prevented scurvy aboard ship until the British Admiralty did an edict saying that all ships will carry citrus, was 264 years. So it's a long slog. I mean, as I said, facts are not enough. And can we have a chat tomorrow, Klaus, sometime after 10 o'clock my time, after 11 my time?
Yeah, why don't we connect later?
Okay.
Mess. Yeah, we'll
So and we can go ahead and begin to develop that model tomorrow and surface it to let people beat up on it next week.
Okay. Yeah, I
Okay.
think that would be helpful. Yeah, so I put Prince now King Charles speech into the chat here. It's really it is the most succinct summation of what is the case with agriculture. For example, Prince Charles at the time, that's 11 years ago, noted that the increase in yield in crops fell below the increase in population growth for the first time around 12 years ago, 14 years ago. And he was saying that predictably we'll be running out of food because the population growth will outpace the yield growth, and that wasn't simply accepted. So there's some great it's a great systems observation that he's doing there. So in 40 minutes, you get a phenomenal overview of what a mess we're in when you're looking at the food system. Okay, why don't we?
I just have one more thing I wanted to add.
Please do.
When speaking with farmers, there's becoming more interest, of course, because fertilizer costs and costs for conventional ag are becoming so high. There is this desire to offset those costs or reduce those costs in some way. The other thing that I kind of have focused on a little bit when speaking with farmers is talking about what happened in the beginning of the Green Revolution. I call what we're trying to do with regenerative ag the new old-fashioned way. It's and I explained to them it's like using similar practices as maybe their grandparents had, but because of the Green Revolution, they can use a little bit of both to transition over completely. So that also has seemed to have at least given some understanding to farmers as to what does this whole regenerative ag thing mean exactly? Because I think there's also a lot of confusion for especially for farmers in the American Deep South who are smaller landholders, and also maybe farmers of color. They don't, at least the ones that I've talked to, a lot of them don't really understand what does regenerative ag mean. So putting it in context of things that they may be familiar with already seems to have also gained a little traction. So anyway, well, thank you guys so much for having this and inviting me, and I look forward to continuing with you folks, and hopefully we can find a way forward.
Awesome. Yeah, we can only explore. I mean, obviously we're wandering here, but we're trying to find a path now that allows us to get more informed and smarter about this. All right. Yeah, maybe we'll continue the conversation and meet again next Tuesday and see where it takes us. And in the meantime, maybe Jean and I can put some beginnings of a model on paper to get some structure into the conversation. Yeah. All
And
right.
you're going to send out the video sometime later today?
I will. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone, and see you again next Tuesday. Bye-bye.